Saltarine Aldyke, who was commonly called Sally, came across a creature that looked like a rabbit lying in the middle of the forest. She wasn't even sure if it was a rabbit since she had never seen a creature like that before. Initially, Sally intended to avoid things she didn't understand. However, as she began to walk away, she heard a loud growling sound from its stomach. Feeling sorry for the creature, she decided to give it a carrot. To initiate a conversation, Sally jokingly asked the creature to consider it a command from a princess, though she also reminded herself that she was no longer a princess. The creature named Fra ate the carrot eagerly. Sally introduced herself and asked if Fra could understand her language. Fra replied that she could understand it a little. Sally then asked for Fra's name, to which she replied, Fra. Curious, Sally asked if Fra was a monster, but Fra explained that she was a demi-human, a rabbit humanoid. This was the moment Sally realized that beings other than humans existed. She also asked why Fra was wearing such strange clothing. Fra explained that it was simply her hobby. Sally pulled out a piece of paper from her bag and asked if Fra had seen the person drawn on it. Fra said she hadn't, but thanked Sally for giving her the carrot. Sally then said her goodbyes, advising Fra not to faint again. However, Fra asked to come along with Sally. Sally, surprised, asked why she wanted to tag along. Fra said it was to repay Sally's kindness. Even though Sally insisted that there was no need for repayment, Fra still decided to follow her. Sally couldn't believe Fra was really trailing her and asked if she had no purpose of her own. Fra admitted she didn't. Sally tried to discourage her, saying it wasn't necessary to accompany her. But Fra argued that traveling alone was dangerous. While Sally agreed, she also remarked that traveling with a demi-human wasn't much different. Hearing this, Fra stopped walking for a moment. Realizing she might have been too harsh, Sally relented and told Fra she could come along. Overjoyed, Fra resumed following Sally. When they arrived at a village, a man approached and asked if Sally was a traveler, mentioning he hadn't seen her before. He greeted her warmly but froze in fear when he noticed Fra screaming that she was a demi-human. It turned out that demi-human were rarely seen in the village. The man demanded that Fra leave as demi-human were not allowed in the area. Sally tried to defend Fra, saying that while she might look unusual, she wasn't evil. The man warned Sally not to be deceived, claiming that demi-human were enemies of humans and couldn't possibly coexist with them. He urged Sally to follow him and leave Fra behind. Sally, reminded of a painful memory of being abandoned, decided to leave with Fra instead. The man shouted after her, begging her not to go, but Sally ignored him. Fra mentioned that the village was actually in the opposite direction. Sally simply instructed Fra to keep following her, declaring it as a direct order. To avoid suspicion, Fra put on a cloak. After observing the area near the village entrance, they made a dash into the village. Once inside, Sally noted that they had successfully sneaked in and only needed to find a place to stay. Suddenly, a man approached them, saying he had never seen them before and asked if they were travelers. Sally explained that they had just arrived. The man, who appeared friendly, said that although the village was simple, they could enjoy their time there. When Fra spotted a basket of carrots the man was carrying, she couldn't contain her excitement and shouted, "Carrots," while pointing at them. Embarrassed, Sally urged Fra to control herself. The man, noticing their apparent hunger, invited them to his house for dinner. He introduced himself as the local leader and assured Sally that it was his duty to welcome travelers, so they didn't need to feel awkward about accepting his offer. The Lord asked where Fra was. Sally explained that Fra seemed exhausted and was resting in the room the Lord had prepared. In reality, Fra was happily munching on a carrot in the room. Sally didn't want Fra to be kicked out again if the Lord found out she was a demi-human. The Lord actually hoped Fra would join him for dinner, but Sally apologized. After dinner, the Lord invited Sally to rest and escorted her to her room. Sally thanked him, and he assured her not to feel shy. Welcoming travelers was something the village could barely manage not long ago due to monsters appearing nearby. Many villagers were killed, and those days were incredibly tough. But one day, a young traveler wiped out all the monsters by himself. Sally asked if the traveler had long black hair, and the Lord confirmed it, wondering if she knew him. Sally was sure that the young traveler who defeated the monsters was Kimpitsu Makoto. She asked where the traveler had gone, but the Lord didn't know. However, he explained that in gratitude for what the traveler did, the villagers had resolved to welcome travelers who passed through the village. Sally understood why the man earlier had tried to drive Fra away. She then asked if travelers who were demi-humans would still be welcomed. The Lord replied that no village would welcome a demi-human, adding that he was intrigued by the term demi-human traveler. The Lord explained that demi-humans were seen as savage and less intelligent from a human perspective, no different from monsters. Thus, demi-humans were considered enemies of humanity. Unbeknownst to them, Fra overheard the conversation about demi-humans. Sally didn't think the Lord was a bad person but felt conflicted. She had promised to stay with Fra no matter what. The next morning, the sound of a monster echoed outside. Villagers screamed that a monster had appeared. Shocked, Sally quickly got out of bed and ran outside to see. The villagers were terrified, realizing that a monster had survived after the young traveler's earlier efforts. But this wasn't just any monster, it was an Oni. The villagers murmured that they might be able to handle it if there were only one. Sally approached the creature and recognized it as an Oni. Suddenly, her body grew hot and her heart pounded fiercely. She had felt this before. The Lord urged her to step back, but she was frozen in place. Just then, Fra darted toward the monster that was about to attack Sally. She kicked it, sending it crashing to the ground in a single blow. Fra then stomped on the monster until it was dead. Sally thanked Fra for saving her. The villagers, however, were terrified of the demi-human who had killed a monster bare-handed. Sally tried to explain that Fra had protected the village, but because she was a demi-human, the villagers still despised her. The Lord admitted that the ferocity needed for a demi-human to kill an Oni was frightening. He decided to drive them out of the village. Unexpectedly, Fra approached the Lord, smiled, and thanked him for the delicious carrots. Sally urged Fra to leave with her, and Fra followed. One of the villagers asked the Lord if he was sure about letting the demi-human go, fearing she might return to attack them. The Lord, however, seemed moved by Fra's gratitude. Sally wished the village could change even a little. Suddenly, members of the Riverside Knights surrounded Sally and Fra. Their commander wanted to ask them some questions. They were forcibly taken to the Northern Empire's Riverside Kingdom Palace. The two were placed in a prison cell, their hands shackled. Sally couldn't understand how things had escalated like this. The Riverside commander apologized for the excessive cell and shackles, explaining that it was necessary because the situation involved a demi-human. Sally was frustrated. Once again, it was all because of the demi-human issue. The Riverside Knights commander apologized for making Sally and Frau uncomfortable. He unlocked the cell and removed their shackles. The commander introduced himself as Greater Hawthorne. Sally introduced herself and Frau in return. Hawthorne asked if Sally was still mad at him. Sally replied that of course she was. She was arrested simply because Frau was a demi-human, and for being with a demi-human. Hawthorne admitted that was partly true, but clarified that the reason they were detained and shackled was that Frau was a powerful demi-human who could take down an Oni with her bare hands. Sally asked if Hawthorne had actually seen Frau defeat the Oni. Hawthorne nodded, explaining that he witnessed it on the road. He hadn't believed a demi-human could fight an Oni, let alone kill one with such ease. Sally was confused as to why everyone viewed demi-humans as monsters. Hawthorne admitted that he used to think that way too, but his perspective changed after he saw Frau fighting to protect Sally and bowing respectfully to someone important in the village. In his eyes, fighting to protect others was the true spirit of a knight. He offered Frau a fist bump. Frau smiled and bumped fists with him, and Sally was happy that someone finally recognized Frau's goodness. Hawthorne then invited them to leave the prison. Sally was surprised at how easily they were being released. Hawthorne explained that it had been an unjust detention of two innocent travelers, and he acknowledged the mistake made by his side. He assured them they didn't need to worry, as he would take full responsibility for the matter. Suddenly, Frau's stomach growled, and she mentioned that she was hungry. Hawthorne chuckled, saying she must be hungry after feeling relieved. Sally, however, expressed her dissatisfaction, pointing out how poorly they had been treated. She emphasized that even though they were innocent travelers, they had been detained unfairly and interrogated without food or water. Hawthorne thought Sally was exaggerating. Sally refused to drop the matter unless Hawthorne treated them to a meal. Hawthorne was shocked at her demands, reluctantly agreeing to provide lunch but warning them not to expect free dinner because knights didn't earn much. While walking through the market, a seafood vendor offered Hawthorne a fresh octopus they had just caught. Sally, upon seeing the octopus, was reminded of the terrifying image of being entangled by a giant one. Hawthorne declined the offer, explaining that he wasn't alone. Two young boys approached Hawthorne, asking what he was doing at the market. They teasingly asked if Sally was his girlfriend and made comments about Sally's impressive figure. Embarrassed, Sally quickly clarified that she wasn't Hawthorne's girlfriend and that he wasn't even close to her type. Meanwhile, Frau wandered over to a carrot vendor. Sally called out to Hawthorne, asking him to pay for the carrots Frau had picked. At the Riverside Kingdom's castle, two powerful Oni stood before its gates: Meki, a high ogre from the east, and Set, a dog Oni from the north. Set confidently declared he could destroy the old castle by himself, but Meki reminded him that Kishin had paired them up to demolish the Riverside Kingdom together. Without further ado, they began their assault. A loud explosion suddenly shook the castle as the front section was obliterated. Meki had used Kihu to tear down the castle's entrance. However, using Kihu caused her body to shrink, and Set laughed at her shrunken form. Meki assured him she would return to normal soon and ordered him to attack first. The Riverside Knights rushed to intercept the threat, recognizing Set as no ordinary monster but an Oni. Determined, they vowed not to let him enter the castle. Set quickly tore through the knights one by one, his strength overwhelming. He mocked the knights, telling them not to prattle on when facing an enemy. After Set decimated the knights, Sally suddenly appeared before him. She seemed entranced, as if hypnotized every time she saw an Oni. Set, noticing her strange gaze, paused in confusion. Hawthorne called out to Sally, urging her to run, but she didn't seem to hear him. Suddenly, Frau leaped forward and kicked Set in the face, though the attack had no effect. Set was surprised to see a demi-human there. Hawthorne was baffled by how unaffected Set was by Frau's kick. Frau's shout snapped Sally out of her trance. Relieved, Hawthorne urged Sally to get away, but instead, Sally suggested Frau join her in fleeing. Hawthorne grabbed Sally and escorted her to safety. Set was surprised to encounter a demi-human protecting humans. Frau explained she was repaying Sally for her kindness and giving her carrots. Moreover, Sally wasn't afraid of her, which made Frau want to stay by her side. Amused, Set declared that Frau's loyalty made their battle more intriguing. After introducing themselves, they engaged in combat. Hawthorne, meanwhile, focused on evacuating the townspeople, prioritizing their safety over confronting the Oni. Realizing Sally wasn't with him, he began searching for her. Frau struck Set with her hammer, but the blow had no effect. Set acknowledged her speed but mocked her lack of power. When Set counterattacked, Frau dodged skillfully but was ultimately caught. Set offered Frau a choice: abandon humanity and live or die protecting them. Frau lifted her hammer, declaring she would protect Sally and never run away. Set prepared to finish her, tossing her aside and promising to kill her with his full strength. Defeated and resigned, Frau whispered her farewell to Sally. Just as Set was about to strike, Sally appeared, shouting that Frau couldn't lose. Frau regained her resolve and attacked again but was overpowered. As she fell injured, Sally rushed to her side. Set, now fully aware of Sally's importance to Frau, decided to kill them both. Frau urged Sally to escape, but a strange sensation took hold of Sally. Her heart pounded and her body grew warm. A legendary tale of Momotaro came to her mind. A peach that brought forth a hero who defeated Onus. Sally pondered the possibility of there being more than one peach. Suddenly, Sally smiled eerily, her aura becoming menacing. When Set moved to attack, Sally's hand instinctively drew her sword and severed Set's wrist in one swift motion. Stunned, Set couldn't believe how easily she had injured him. In an unsettling trance, Sally laughed triumphantly, delighted at her newfound ability to defeat Set. Menki was sitting under a tree waiting for her body to return to its normal size. She was sure Set was having fun fighting the Rimdare Knights. Suddenly, someone greeted her from behind the tree. Curious about how long that person had been there since she hadn't sensed their presence at all, Menki decided to play a trick on the human. She told him that her companion had left her, she was feeling very bored, and she was looking for someone to play with. Out of nowhere, the large tree nearby was cut down with incredible speed. The person turned out to be Kibitsu Mikoto, and he gladly accepted Meki's invitation. Meki had no idea who Mikoto was. Mikoto asked if Meki was the one who fired that large Kihao. He also noticed that Meki was currently recovering her strength. To him, cutting her down at that moment would be too boring. Finally, Meki understood why she had been paired with Set. It was because a formidable enemy was awaiting her. Mikoto then asked how much time she needed to recover her body. Meki responded that she required about 5 more minutes to return to her normal size. Mikoto agreed to wait and suggested they chat before their fight. Meanwhile, Set laughed and acknowledged Sally's impressive ability to fight against 2 such powerful beings. He continued trying to strike Sally with his other hand, but Sally easily blocked his punch. Set was puzzled by how strong Sally was. She was different from Aiken. She was something else entirely. Meki asked Mikoto if he was the monster hunter everyone had been talking about, the wanderer who killed Oni and other monsters. Mikoto praised Meki for figuring that out. Meki then questioned Mikoto's reason for doing all of that, wondering if it was some ridiculous sense of justice. Mikoto turned the question back on her, asking why she had attacked the fortress and killed humans. Meki explained that humans had dug into the earth, chopped down trees, dammed rivers, and transported giant stones from far away just to build castles. Humans acted as if they had the right to destroy the habitats of other creatures. By this time, Meki's body had returned to its normal size. She declared that the growing human population posed a threat to the entire world. Mikoto laughed and called Meki a nature lover. He said her reasoning was ridiculous, even though it might be her primary motivation. Deep down, however, Meki was simply taking revenge against those who had stolen her land. Mikoto pointed out that even if humans cared about the environment, Meki and the others wouldn't stop attacking them. Mikoto admitted that he was the same, so he understood. Mikoto said that their mutual hatred made them perfect opponents for each other, which made the prospect of killing each other all the more enjoyable. Meki then plucked her own eye and multiplied it, making several eyes float in the air. She stated that Mikoto was an extremely dangerous being and that she had to kill him right there and then. Mikoto laughed at her declaration and invited her to try. Set, on the other hand, declared that Sally was a dangerous being and that he had to kill her on the spot. Set felt ashamed to use Kiku against a human, but he was confident that he wouldn't lose to her. He fired Kiku at Sally, causing damage to the castle fortress. Seeing this, Meki turned to look, but Mikoto quickly struck her down with his sword. Meki's body was destroyed, but she reappeared behind Mikoto. Mikoto immediately identified her ability as Xian Dao. Meki was shocked that Mikoto figured it out with just one swing of his sword. That was indeed Xian Dao. Every floating eye in the air was a part of her. Mikoto explained that Xian Dao is an ancient technique requiring someone to generate Kai to harmonize with nature. He added that Xian Dao suits Meki, a nature-loving High Oni, and that any High Oni using Xian Dao deserves to be killed. Meki felt honored by his words but asked if Mikoto was sure, pointing out that something was happening inside the fortress and wondering if Mikoto shouldn't be more interested in that. However, Mikoto showed no interest, stating that his goal wasn't to protect humans but to exterminate Oni. Worrying about humans would come only after he killed Meki. Meki sensed Mikoto's murderous intent and revealed that she had sent one of her eyes to summon reinforcements. Mikoto questioned when she had done that, but Meki declared that she had no choice but to kill him. Mikoto countered, asking if she really thought she could hold out until help arrived. Confident in Xian Dao, Meki claimed she could stall for as long as necessary. Yet, with just one attack, Mikoto obliterated all her eyeballs. This demonstration of power made Meki anxious. Meanwhile, Set acknowledged Sally's strength in cornering him and forcing him to unleash Kiho. He admitted feeling humiliated but considered the battle over. Unfortunately for him, the massive explosion only startled Sally, leaving her unscathed. Shocked, Set asked how she could possibly emerge without a scratch. Sally responded by slashing Set with her sword. Mikoto mocked Meki, suggesting that her only option was to fire Kihao. He even encouraged her to try, implying it might kill him. Frustrated by his provocations, Meki grew angry. To prove his resolve, Mikoto stabbed his own foot, promising not to move even if she fired Kihao. He offered her a choice: fire it or run away like a coward. Insulted and enraged, Meki refused to flee and launched Kihu at Mikoto. The resulting explosion was massive, causing destruction all around. Still, Mikoto emerged completely unharmed. Pulling the sword from his foot, Mikoto approached Meki, who shrank in size each time she used Kihao. This allowed Mikoto to easily kick her down and hold her at sword point. Meki, overwhelmed, asked who Mikoto really was. Her question triggered memories of his childhood. Mikoto stated his name and declared that he was the enemy of all Oni before stabbing Meki's eye. Set, gravely wounded, couldn't believe that someone like him, High Oni, had fallen in such a way. He collapsed in front of Sally, who, moments later, also fainted from exhaustion. Dog observed that Meki was still breathing and asked why Mikoto hadn't killed her. Mikoto revealed that he had removed Meki's horn, the source of her Oni powers, along with her eye. Without them, Meki was no different from an ordinary human. Mikoto then asked what would happen if an Oni resembling a human were stripped of their powers. Dog explained that such a being would be rejected by both Oni and humans. Mikoto concluded that living in such a state was a far worse punishment than death for Meki. Dog disagreed, speculating that Mikoto saw a reflection of himself in Meki. He also mentioned detecting a familiar scent mixed with blood emanating from the fortress, suspecting Mikoto had noticed it too. But Mikoto chose to leave rather than investigate further. He was aware that Sally was behind the castle walls and found it startling to realize she was just like him. Dog then complained of being hungry. Mikoto retorted that Dog hadn't done anything to warrant feeling hungry, but Dog insisted he was. Sarcastically, Mikoto suggested that Dog eat some grass, claiming it looked tasty. Dog protested, saying there was no way he could eat grass. From a distance, Sumeraji smiled as he finally discovered Sally's whereabouts at that moment. Sally was asleep in a room, with Fra faithfully staying by her side. Sally woke up and greeted Fra, asking where she was. Fra told her she was in the castle's chamber. Sally then asked when she had fallen asleep, beginning to recall that there had been an Oni in the castle earlier. She asked what had happened to the large Oni. Hawthorne explained that Sally had defeated the giant Oni. Since only Sally and Fra were present at the time, he could only trust Fra's account. Despite Hawthorne questioning Fra several times, she consistently said that Sally had won effortlessly. Sally then asked if Fra was hurt. Fra reassured her that all she needed was to sleep, wake up, eat some carrots, and she would recover. Hawthorne returned a sword that had been lying near the Oni's corpse, its blade soaked in blood with a massive slash mark across the Oni's body. He then asked Sally if she could move her body. Sally responded that she could move just fine. Hawthorne invited her to step outside. They encountered two Rimdari soldiers who thanked both Frau and Sally for protecting their kingdom. They even asked to shake Frau's hand and remarked on how soft her hands felt. Sally playfully warned Frau not to let strangers feel her softness. Sally then asked Hawthorne, "Aren't demi-humans hated?" Hawthorne replied that it had nothing to do with being a demi-human. What mattered was that Sally and Frau had protected the kingdom from an unstoppable monster, and everyone wanted to thank them for it. Hawthorne then asked Frau and Sally to step into a cell. Confused, Sally asked why they were being thrown into prison again. Was it because she was unbeatable? However, Hawthorne clarified that they weren't being imprisoned, but that there was someone they needed to meet in the dungeon, Meki, who was unconscious. Sally asked who the unconscious woman was. Hawthorne explained that Meki had arrived with a giant monster and had used mysterious powers to destroy the kingdom's walls. It was possible that she too was a monster, in fact an Oni. Sally wasn't convinced. Hawthorne said he had gathered this information from the testimony of farmers working outside the fortress. Sally remarked that Meki looked like an ordinary human. Hawthorne admitted that he wasn't an expert, but noted that human-like Onis weren't uncommon. If Meki was indeed an Oni, she would need to be executed. It would be too dangerous to let her wake up, so they had to kill her while she was unconscious. Sally called the idea cruel. Hawthorne agreed, but explained that was why he had used his authority to delay the punishment. He wanted to question Meki when she woke up. Sally teasingly smiled and said it was just like when Hawthorne had captured her and Frau. Being kind always seemed to cause problems for him. Sally then asked if Hawthorne intended to guard Meki. He confirmed that he did, because if she was truly an Oni, ordinary knights wouldn't stand a chance against her. Hawthorne then entrusted Meki to Frau. Sally, curious, asked what about her, especially since she was unbeatable. Hawthorne said he would leave it to Sally as well. Hawthorne excused himself to deal with the chaos at the fortress. He locked the cell temporarily, telling them to call the knights outside if anything happened. Frau noticed that Meki was only pretending to be asleep. Caught off guard, Meki finally stopped her act and revealed she had already woken up. Sally asked Meki to introduce herself, but with a cold tone, she replied that it was obvious just by looking at her. She was an Oni, enemy of humans. Unfortunately, Sally thought Meki looked just like an ordinary human. Meki figured she could wait until her strength returned. She declared that she would kill Sally and Frau and leave the place, even if her powers weren't fully back yet, since the physical strength of an Oni surpassed that of humans. Meki tried to punch Frau, but her blow was incredibly weak. Surprised at how powerless she was, Meki didn't expect to be this feeble. Sally, on the other hand, called her cute. That's when Meki realized she had lost her eye and her horn, the source of her power. Without them, her strength wouldn't return. Confused, Meki wondered why Mikoto had let her live. Hearing Meki mention Kibitsu Mikoto, Sally raised an eyebrow and asked if the Mikoto she was referring to was the feminine-looking man with long hair. Meki confirmed this, adding that she had only recently learned Mikoto was a man. Sally said if Mikoto was chasing Meki, then she must be an Oni. Sally asked her to explain what had happened. Meki recounted everything. After her defeat, Mikoto destroyed the source of her Oni power, which ultimately led to her imprisonment. Hearing this, Sally couldn't help but smile, which made Meki curious. Sally admitted she couldn't stop smiling because learning Mikoto was nearby made her feel excited. Sally then told Frau it was time to leave. She thanked Meki for sharing her story and promised to keep her true identity a secret. Sally asked Meki not to tell anyone she was an Oni. Meki was puzzled and asked why. Sally explained that if the knights discovered Meki was an Oni, they would execute her. However, Meki believed execution might be better. With her Oni powers gone, living like this seemed worse than death. Dying as an Oni with her soul intact sounded preferable to her. Sally suddenly changed her mind. Instead of leaving, she decided they should escape the prison. Frau kicked the cell door so hard that it broke off. Meki was stunned and asked what they were doing. Sally invited her to escape together, saying that while Meki might be an Oni, she couldn't just leave her to be executed, especially when she seemed so resigned to her fate. At first, Meki hesitated, but eventually agreed to go with them. She stubbornly declared she was still an Oni, even if her powers were gone, and admitted she was only using Sally. She also said that while she was willing to leave with Sally, it didn't mean they were friends. Meanwhile, as Hawthorne was receiving damage reports, a soldier burst in, informing him that the Oni girl had escaped. Furious, Hawthorne regretted underestimating her. He asked if Sally and Frau were okay. The soldier revealed that it was actually Sally who had led the Oni girl out. Sally, Frau, and Meki kept running, but Rimberry knights were chasing them. Meki even suggested Sally kill 2 or 3 knights to stop the pursuit. Sally scolded her, telling her not to talk like an Oni. Meki retorted that she was an Oni, which was why they had to keep running. The chase continued until they were blocked by Hawthorne at the main gate. He demanded Sally stop, claiming he understood what she was thinking. But as a knight, he couldn't let her do this. Sally gave Frau a command. With a single kick, Frau knocked Hawthorne off his horse. Sally ran past him, shouting an apology as she went. Hawthorne yelled after her, asking if she realized what she was doing. Sally responded that she knew exactly what she was doing. That was why she was running as fast as she could. She added that Hawthorne was a good person, which was why he had to let them go. Hawthorne said he couldn't. Another soldier handed him a horse, and he called for cavalry riders to pursue them. Just as Hawthorne was preparing to ride, a sudden explosion occurred. In the blink of an eye, the Rimberry kingdom vanished without a trace, completely obliterated by the blasts.